strong to hold the powers of the sun. To dream, believe in strength. Now I'm the only one, only one. I was an ordinary boy until I broke the rules. My life destroyed, life destroyed. Until I walk awake, scream my mind, I shout, the ground shakes. How much can I take? My mind will break. Will it break? Can I take? Can I be your superhero? Fly up, away. It's the first time of today. To dream, believe. You are the strength, you're all I need. Oh, gonna give it a shot. Only one of me to shield you all from the enemy. You're a superhero. You're a superhero. Can I be your superhero? Superhero. 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 Can I be your superhero? Like you, be strong to hold the powers of the sun.
Read the story, heard the song, thought I knew what love was, but I felt it, but all along
Good evening, everybody. My name is 12 Gauge. Thank you for being here tonight. We have a special guest tonight. His name is Andrew Vanhoff, and we premiered one of his videos probably 3 weeks ago, and we are talking about the inner child. So the man is here to discuss his work. So he'll give us some insight and some knowledge. So without further ado, I'm going to bring Andrew to the stage.
Awesome. Well, thanks for having me here, Gage. It's gonna be good to meet you and get your perspective on some of these things as well. I as I mentioned when you reached out to me, it's something I'm very passionate about, but I have little formal training. Let's put it that way, right? So I
Right.
will love to bounce some back and forth some ideas, and it should be good.
Okie dokie. Tell us a little bit about yourself. I mean, you said you have a little bit of insight, but you sounded very knowledgeable on that video that I played of yours.
Well, I appreciate that. So I'm 29 and about coming up on 3 years ago was sort of my launch into the inner workspace. And up till
Okay.
then, I was probably the somewhat typical 20-something-year-old. I grew up in a very like mental headspacey family, very like a lot of engineers, teachers, very like brain analytic heavy analysis sort of you might say left brain sort of work, right?
Okay.
And so for a long time I probably would have thought like inner child or therapy was like this kind of woo woo, oh, that's this kind of, we don't do that
Yeah.
over here. No shade on my
Yeah.
family because they're great, but that was just sort of the environment. And then like like so many people I think who end up searching for this sort of like inner work, I went through a pretty, at the time, very challenging breakup,
Oh,
and
okay.
was left sort of, it was one of those situations where there was a bit of a identity enmeshment, where there's like this ideological what life is going to look like with this person, and how my whole world is sort of based on this projection. And then the person goes away and my whole world falls down. Not really, but like,
Yeah.
and
Been there,
so,
done that, buddy. Been
you
there,
know,
done that.
picking
Yeah.
up the pieces, right, leaves you
Yeah.
asking a lot of, as I'm sure you,
Yeah.
through your own journey, right? Um, Asking a bunch of questions. And that was sort of my first foray into asking these like deeper questions, learning about inner child and not only the inner child, because I think the inner child is fantastic as a metaphor and as a methodology to like understand so many of the limiting beliefs really that hold us in place, that we perceive of as reality, um, even though they may not be that at all. And of course, there's a myriad of ways in which that shows up in different people, right? Different
Right.
presentations, maybe, of our how that particular feeling manifests throughout 20 or 30 years. But it's quite fascinating. And I had the good fortune, just a couple days ago, I had lunch with my one of my grandfathers, and fascinating because obviously he's been in my life for a very long time, and we
Right.
talk a lot, but I hadn't had the sit down like one-on-one conversation, and we talked a lot about sort of like spirituality and psychology, and like his own experience, throughout my childhood and even before I was born, of like finding that identity, and told me some stories I hadn't heard before. And it was very fascinating to be like, oh yeah, grandpa's got that whole thing going on too.
Right. Right.
But that's
Right.
sort of how I ended up, grandfather's story aside, that breakup and that following sort of loss of what I perceived of my identity, and then the search for more information sort of started that whole process for me.
Well, that sounds like a very interesting, insightful journey for you. You nothing create change like a bad breakup. You know what I mean? Like I'm not talking about a bad breakup like it was horrible or anything, but when your heart's into it, you have like you said, you planned on being with this person. You had, ambitions of the future and things of that nature. And then they go away and you're left with, okay, now what? What
Yeah.
are all the feelings coming from? How come I can't get rid of these feelings, these thoughts, all these things that are going around? It's very
And I think for that reason, like human relationship is one of the most terrifying and amazing things, in the world, right? Is
yeah,
it really has the ability to have like that knife's edge reveal of cutting through the fat of who you think you are and what you think you want and who you think somebody else is.
right,
And it really does shine a light on so many of those darker, more like
right.
you
Andrew,
can't hide so much.
I want to play a little bit of your video that I showed before. That way, my people in the chat, they'll know
Of
what
course.
you're talking about. That way, give them a little insight, and then we can talk a little more if that's okay with you.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay. Well, let me pull up your video because I have it ready.
It's funny. I made it probably, I don't know, it was a while. But you can see I gesture so much.
Hey, it's fine. I used to do that. I'm sitting on my hand as we speak. You know. So let me put it up right here, and we'll go ahead and start playing it.
So deeply into ourselves that they are like walking or talking. They're automatic to the point where we don't think about them anymore, but they have a profound impact on how we interact with the world, how we see the world, and what we do on a daily basis. Because here's the thing, right? Our subconscious doesn't know if something is good or bad. It just gets a program and it runs it. It's essentially like a computer. It does a great job at just keeping those things running. But there can be problems with that. Let's say as a child, you maybe had to be a peacekeeper between your parents, right? They argued a lot and it was your job to kind of make sure everybody in the family was happy. Or maybe you felt betrayed by your parents and decided you had to take care of yourself. You couldn't trust anybody. Or maybe you felt that you only got love and validation. You got your needs met when you performed a certain way, when you were perfect or didn't have any problems of your own. You were able to take care of other people. That's when you got the love and affection you wanted from your parents, right? What can happen is as children, we form these subconscious belief systems. We think that as long as I take care of other people, as long as I give them what they need, then they'll take care of me. Then they'll love me back, and then I get to feel okay about myself.
That's very insightful right there, Andrew. What did you mean? You want to clarify any more of what that statement meant as you were saying it?
So, in regards to the, basically, I think if I'm understanding the part you were referencing, due to some sort of fundamental insecurity, typically we develop essentially a coping or a compensation mechanism, that serves us for a certain point of time in our life, right? So our parents are emotionally unavailable for whatever reason. Not that makes them bad people, because they are laboring under the same insecurity operating in there. It's a whole thing. But what those, obviously as a little kid, right? Our existence does quite literally depend on fitting into a given situation, being able to adapt to challenging circumstances. And we learn through experience that, like, this is my role. This is who I am to a certain degree. This is what I do to fit in and get my reciprocation. I've done my part of the deal, essentially.
Right.
And the way I see it, at least, and I believe that's the way I do my best to express it in that video, is that that's not necessarily like wrong. It's just the way things were 20 years ago might have you relating to life in a very different way from as you could be or would be more beneficial on a daily basis now, right? Because so many of us, as an adult, you are equipped with, even if you don't, and many people don't feel like it, you are equipped with significantly more capabilities, both like mental and physical capabilities. You can literally take care of yourself unlike you could when you were a little kid. But because we are so typically emotionally hung up on those patterns and have learned those ways of being, that's where the sort of insecurity kind of comes in, or repeating what are no longer beneficial, even though they might have been out of necessity, you know, once what you needed to do to get along with whatever situation, but now might be a hindrance or not, or even an outright negative manifestation of that same pattern. And I think people pleasing is a really big one. People learn, like, empathy is a fantastic skill to have, and I think in fact empathy is what makes being human interesting, you know, human connection, the ability to put yourself in another person's place. But a lot of people learn that as a peacekeeping measure, right? They grow up in a situation where, you know, mom and dad are maybe fighting, or maybe there isn't a mom and dad who are both in the picture, and now my empathy is actually how well I can read your emotional state. It's actually that subtle manipulation. You know, I need to know what you're going to do so I can keep myself safe in this situation. And that's, once again, that's, you know, it's fine when you're a little kid, but if you can't turn that off as an adult, now you think your job, you know, in a work environment, maybe you're the one who's like, oh, I always have to keep my coworkers from fighting each other, or I'm experiencing all this stress with trying to make sure I know what my boss wants. And of course, you know, in limited circumstances, like, this is all normal stuff. But in the extreme manifestations of those patterns, it's like, I can't shut off that drive to keep everybody happy, or I can't shut off that drive to make sure these people aren't fighting each other. I need to perform. And it's sort of that same thing, just, you know, magnified in the adult world, essentially.
Exactly. Well, let me give you a little insight, because I didn't really give you an insight on my background.
Yes, please do. I was going to ask.
I've been a therapist for about 20 years. My specialty is addiction studies and drug and alcohol. And that's where I was introduced to the inner child, because not only as an adult, probably around your age, I was going through a lot of turmoil, a lot of misunderstanding of why I felt like a kid who was lost in an adult world. I felt like, you know, I didn't really have the coping skills to deal with life, and I was constantly struggling, looking for a foundation, and there was nothing to refer back to. Like, I grew up in a very strict household, so there was some abuse, and, you know, verbal and physical and stuff like that. So throughout the years, that inner child, the damage of the abuse and the trauma was, I didn't realize it then, but my inner child, so to speak, was left in those points of reference of pain. Like, whenever they continued to happen, those thoughts, why I must deserve this, or why am I a bad person, or if I was better, then why can't I move on with all these thoughts without them overcompensating my life? Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And I can imagine, you, just to briefly interject, you mentioned growing up in a very strict family, right?
Yes.
And I see I froze. Am I back? I'm back. Okay. My internet did something weird there for a second.
All right.
You say we're good. You said grew up in a strict family, and combined with that, you said, you know, feeling like a child in an adult's world, sort of like not knowing. And I can imagine, because I see this in myself a little bit, when there's that strictness, or even in my case, I think it's something to do with the intellectual, like, superiority, like the very brainy family, right? There's like a right way that things are supposed to be done. And me, at least, that can manifest as paralysis when that inner child is stuck feeling like it's a little kid trying to figure out the right path in the adult world, which of course is very, very nebulous, and there's not always a right, clear answer, and things play out over decades, not minutes. And so that resonated a little bit with me. I just wanted to share that, you know, that that insight into maybe that strictness being portrayed as like a little bit of a lockup in the mind of the inner child, you know, being like, I'm not set up to find the right answer in this adult world via
Right.
this strict programming.
Yeah, because not only was I lost in my head, I was also stuck in an addiction, you know, so I was battling two demons at once, you know, and it was just overwhelming at times. But what I learned later on, as far as my journey, is the inner child that I was leaving behind was not necessarily too far away from me. I felt that as I grew up, I didn't need anything from my past. I didn't need my parents' acceptance. I didn't need, you know, all
Mhm.
that stuff that I went through. So as we grow up, we think, well, I'm grown. I
Yeah.
can do what I want. I can make my own decisions. I don't have to rely or put it by somebody. But we're still bad at coping with life on life's terms sometimes. You know.
Yeah, it's very interesting, as you say, coping with life on life's terms, and I think that's a key. Pardon the fact that I have the
You're
light
fine.
of God shining
You're
down on my. There's a
fine.
window behind me, and the sun's like
Hey,
at a
all of a
right
sudden
angle
the
to the window.
aura,
Yeah.
your
Um,
halo is shining, bro. Your halo
yes.
is shining.
But as you said, the you know, the meeting with life on life's terms, because I think so often that inner child has its own, you know, the terms you learned when you were a little kid, that things were like supposed to be this way. This is your role. Even as we, you know, mentioned the people pleasing, perfectionism, whatever. It's like, this is my role. And then of
Mhm.
course life's terms don't care about that role, really. Like, life's
Right.
gonna do whatever. And that is both the challenge, but also perhaps the opportunity, you know, to move through some of that older stuff. But it's very interesting because, like, you butt heads with life's terms a lot when you're coming to it with that old framework of I have to be this way, which may
Yeah.
or may not be true, but
Well,
that perception, you know.
like you said earlier about the relationship, well, every time a relationship ended, it paralyzed me. You used that word paralyzed. It would literally paralyze me to my core.
Hmm.
And there was nothing, no love or connection from my parent to bring myself back to life, so to speak. It was an emptiness that I had to make up for myself
Hmm.
because there was no real attachment throughout the abuse and all that other
Of
stuff.
course, and I'm
Nothing
sure that
negative.
that feeds into the addiction as well, I'm sure.
Yes, yes, exactly. So as those breakups happen, or you lose a job, or you lose friendships, some people can, you know, be hurt by it, but they can bounce back within a couple of days, maybe a week.
Hmm.
But if you have inner child issues, you stay stuck with that trauma, that hurt, and your brain is like a ping pong ball, just sitting there bouncing back and forth, back and
That's a
forth.
great visual metaphor. I love that. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Let me play a little more of your video, okay?
Absolutely. I'm gonna use that opportunity to see if I can block out some of this. This is no
Okay.
offense to this sunlight, which is beautiful, but I might be able to.
These are experiences that a lot of people have as children that they internalize into that subconscious mind. This
Oh no,
program
still
is
there.
now running on autopilot behind the scenes in so many lives. It doesn't have to be just those things, those are just examples. There are many ways where these kind of insidious patterns we formed as children as coping strategies become a pattern that we repeat over and over and over through our adult lives, not really noticing. And then people will find themselves now as an adult desperately craving that validation, trying to be perfect so that everybody loves them in the world, and being confused when they don't get the love or adoration they need. Or maybe they're petrified to take any action because they think they need to be perfect for people to approve of them. Or maybe they have trust issues in relationships and push people away and kind of act a little bit cold because they have that wound that says, if I let anybody get close to me, then they'll hurt me. These are the adult expressions of those inner child wounds we have formed that are unhealed. They are still influencing our behavior 10, 20, 30, or more years after the event itself happened, because we have not gone in and questioned those behavior patterns that we've inscribed into that subconscious mind. And it also doesn't always matter how bad things that happened to you were. It's not really about that you had to have some terrible, terrible childhood to form these childhood wounds, because the experiences we have as children are filtered through a very immature mindset. So don't judge yourself if you feel like you have some of these things. You're like, man, nothing that bad really happened to me. Realize that it is judged through the perspective of a very immature child. So everything can feel traumatizing and scary to a 3. We have a very warped perspective of reality, and we're just little kids trying to do the very best we can to understand the world. So we just
Right. Perfect. 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 I love that. You know, where the part that really, throughout the knowledge of the inner child, you know, the child stopped growing emotionally whenever some kind of trauma engulfs and you stop growing. Whether you start getting addicted to substances, whether you start getting addicted to other things, or you start just self-harming yourself with negative thoughts. Some people can stop growing at that point. And what I always used to tell my clients is this: okay, take a moment to find a picture of yourself at your happiest time in life when you were a child, whatever picture that is, and take that picture with you everywhere you go. Because when you start to feel the emotional uncertainty, the irritability, all that things that rise up in us, it's almost that is the inner child throwing the temper tantrum, because it doesn't realize that it's not today that the child is being potentially hurt. It's a defense mechanism. So therefore,
Yeah.
you have to learn how to combat those negative thoughts with an image of what you're dealing with. Many of my clients go get high, go get drunk, you know, go be promiscuous, anything. And I would tell them, hey, what was the last time that you felt happiness? Some of them would tell me 12 years old, 13 years old. And I would say, well, if you were with a 13-year-old you, would you hand them some drugs to cope with life when they're throwing the temper tantrum? Now that you've
That's a
understood.
great question. That's a great way to paint that. Yeah.
And the same thing with alcohol or pornography, or, you know, you say, oh, quit crying in the corner. Go sleep around. You're 13, you know, go sleep around. Go deal with it like
Hmm.
this. And, you know, that's some of the analogies that I would give them, you know.
Yeah. And that even feeds into, even if people don't have in presentation at least, overly destructive addiction, so
Yeah.
often I think people tend to, you know, we have some favorite flavor of avoidance, whether that's alcohol or, you know, binge watching Netflix or whatever. It's nothing, and of course in moderation, like it's fine, but it's when it's twisted a little bit, right? And it becomes this is my escape mechanism from dealing with this thing. That analogy becomes such a good, like, would you hand this to your past self? Because it's so interesting to have that perspective and be like, my gosh, no, like I love that little kid, you know, like that was a and and
Yeah.
and then to realize that it's like you are that little kid, you know, like pay attention, that's still who you are. And but it feels so in that, because of course I learned a lot of this through, you know, exploring my own experience with it, right? And realizing where I felt stuck in my own um and my own version essentially of what you mentioned, which is I have not had addictions in form of harmful substances, I would say, but um a lot of like procrastination, you know, video game TV was like my drug of choice, was like kind of numb out the mind. And that was strange, because at a certain point where you maybe realize it's like an addiction is the point where you realize you're no longer doing it necessarily because it's fun or enjoyable, right? It's just now it's like you're like, what the hell am I like? Why am I doing this? I feel
Right,
compelled to.
right.
Whereas like, I once as a little, as a teenage boy growing up in the 90s and 2000s, I was a big fan of video games because it was the rise of the video game.
Right.
And as a kid, that was awesome. And then at a certain point, you're just kind of doing the same thing over and over. You're like, am I even like, or is this something that comes up to compensate? And one of the things that's related to inner child, as you've probably heard of it, I forget the guy's name who does the inner family systems, which is basically he conceptualizes a little bit differently, but like different inner parts. So it's not necessarily like the inner child, but the inner child might be one of different inner voices that we have,
Right.
and but he talks about one of the responses being like a firefighter, which is come in and like spray a hose of what, and the inner child being triggered, and then the inner firefighter response, whether that's alcohol or drugs or
I mean,
video games.
it could be going to binge on Amazon or spend
Mhm.
money you don't have,
Absolutely, yeah.
or drive fast, or become compulsive with buying parts for your car that you don't need, or anything, any kind of abnormal adaptation to your thoughts or your behaviors that you don't want to feel. It's an escape, like you said. The video game. Hey, the graphics were better in the 90s and early 2000s. So everybody was like, mesmerized. Do you remember Super Tecmo Bowl?
Oh no, I do not.
Okay, that was like Nintendo type stuff, and
Yeah.
we would binge that game. Like we would stay up for days playing. Like my friend and I, and that was an escape. We didn't realize it then, but we were escaping from reality because
Mm-hmm.
we weren't doing anything productive. We were just focusing on winning and losing. And, as you grow older, you keep looking for something to fulfill that need. Because when you
Yeah.
feel like you're not winning, you're looking for something that you can win at. Because
Mhm.
that's that reenactment there.
Yeah, absolutely. And to speak to that, one of the things that was tough and occasionally continues to be tough for me is I feel like one of my inner child stickler points is achievement. Like I was due to the intellectual side of the family I grew up with. There was a certain not like it was drilled into me that you have to learn to play the cello and everything. Like that was not but there was a lot of praise associated with like, oh, Andrew did good, Andrew did. And I was the oldest grandchild on both sides of my family, so I think there was an added level of like everything I did was awesome from the perspective of my family, which was great. But as a little kid, that got internalized somehow with like, I need a pressure to perform, a pressure to like, if you, it was like everything's always been good, but like, when's the other, when's it going to drop? Like, what's going to happen when something,
Right.
and
Exactly.
so that became like all right, we got to stay on this, like, being perfect at everything train. And that was for me the perfectionism was a big one, like working on letting go of like, oh, dude, it's okay, just like chill out a little bit.
Right. Well, let's watch a little bit more of your video here. Let me
Absolutely.
skip it a little bit so we can get to the good.
Everybody in the world, or never show any flaws, or never connect with anybody so that they don't risk getting hurt. And those things that help us get through those traumatic periods in our childhood don't necessarily translate very well to real life. And having healthy relationships as adults in particular can be very damaging to have these kinds of childhood patterns running, because they affect you can bond emotionally with other people. Whether you're going to be super needy or super avoidant is frequently a function of these kinds of internal child wounds that are running on autopilot. And these wounds tend to form around feelings or fears of insecurity, unworthiness, unlovableness, the feeling of not being whole or being less than everybody else. These things that are abandonment, maybe, these things are intrinsically terrifying when you were a child because you are completely dependent on your primary caregivers for everything, right? You have no ability to really cope with anything in the world. You need this person to give you pretty much everything. And so any insecurity in that relationship, any fear or threat to that pipeline of your needs being met is intrinsically terrifying to a child. And that is the kind of emotional trigger which is set with these patterns. It's a very visceral, like, we'll die if this doesn't go our way kind of thing.
exactly.
Which explains why later in life, like, you get broken up within a relationship and it feels like you're gonna die. It's not rational anymore.
I'm
because
just
you
talking
can now
about
take care
myself
of
there
yourself,
as
but
if
it's
it was an
hitting that
example.
same
But it's
trigger,
really
and
just
that's why it can feel so earth-shattering.
Excuse me?
Oh, I said, I'm just talking about myself there as if it was a random example. Like, I give the example,
Oh.
you feel like you're gonna die when you get broken up with. Yeah, you, whoever's watching. That's No, I'm talking about me. That's how I felt.
Yeah. I do the same thing. Yeah, let me give you this unsolicited example, and then I'll use my own example.
Please
Everybody's
do.
like, yeah, bro, that's you. Quit ranting.
It's because it's hitting those childhood patterns. In my own life, that fear of never being good enough or never being enough led to paralysis when it came to anything challenging. I loved, like, school. I was getting good grades, college, all of that was great as long as I was sure that I would get like a 4.0 or I would get the perfect grade. Then I could maintain an image of perfection, be like, I'm always the one doing everything right. I'm getting all the good grades. But whenever there was an area of ambiguity or, like, multiple right answers, it wasn't so clear what to do, I would freeze because I was like, I had to do the right thing to function in the world. And when there was not a clear right answer, it was like existentially terrifying. I would also experience attracting people into my life who were kind of emotionally unavailable and then trying to fix them.
No way. You were one of those too?
Oh yeah. I don't know. I might tell it in this. I might say it in the video, but in case I don't, I should tell the story. This is why perhaps some introspection is good, because I hadn't noticed this until the breakup I talked about, which was like the big one that kind of caused enough of a shock for me to, like, re-examine things. But I realized that I had like 2 consecutive relationships with girls who I had started talking to after they were crying on their birthday. And I was like, bro, that is way too specific to be some random, like that's a you thing. That's not a them thing.
So, getting involved with emotionally unavailable people, where did that come from? Have you figured that out, or?
It's a great question. I think so. When I love my parents to death. My parents are amazing. They are still together. And one of the things I'm very grateful for is, like, now my parents have done a lot of introspection, inner work as well. So I'm very grateful that I can have conversations. Like, I could have a conversation like this with my parents and they would be very open and receptive to it. In fact, we have, which I think is very cool. That said, when I was growing up, my dad was going to school full time, and he was working, I think at one point, like 2 or 3 jobs at the same time. And my mom was a stay-at-home mom full time. Mm-hmm. So dad was constantly, like, a little bit tense, he's working, he's exhausted all the time. He's juggling all these things. And so my mom was obviously my primary caregiver, like, spent all my time with my mom because she's the full-time mom. And I remember this was when I realized the connection with, like, the trying to fix or solve other people's problems as a way to get my own emotional needs met. Because I realized that when my parents would argue over money or whatever as little kids, because from my perspective, this was a big deal. From them, they're just trying to figure out bills or whatever. And normal adult stuff when you're working 3 jobs and going to school, tensions can run a little high. But if my parents would argue, I would, like, go comfort my mom, and I would, like, be like, oh, It's okay, mom, like, hug mom. And then I realized
Time out.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Right there. The the superhero. Put on the cape.
Exactly.
Come
The
to save the
Mr.
day.
Mr. Fix It.
Take the glasses off. Put on the cape. I'm gonna save the
Absolutely.
day. Keep going.
Absolutely. And
Oh, and I love
and that's where I noticed that, because I had been blind to that, and it was like, whoa, oh, hold on. And what I realized was that I think there's probably some level of insecurity within me. So mom and dad are arguing, little Andrew feels a little uncertain. And then I get my reassurance of that uncertainty through this being there for somebody else in like an emotional need. If I'm able to sustain their well-being in this, then what I get is the love and affection. They're so grateful, whatever. That's like, oh, I've done my job. Superman saves the day type thing, right? Now I've saved the day. I get the damsel in distress. And that
when you're attracted to emotionally unavailable women, you don't ever get really the payoff.
Mm-hmm.
You're the fixer. Let me go to Andrew. Let me go to 12 gauge. They'll save the day. They'll make me feel better. They'll listen to me for hours. And then the next day I call them up and say, I listened to you, but so-and-so called me and I went over there again and he did the same thing.
Absolutely. Because you are just the other side of their pattern, so they have the patterns maybe where they feel like, uncertain about this one thing, but then they need to go get their needs met over here, but then they actually want the other thing and they don't feel like it's like the other side of the coin, and so that's when I realized when it occurred to me, and this wasn't until after the breakup. It was a couple months after, but that girl and I had started talking. I went to a party with some friends, and I had known her for quite a while, but she had a boyfriend, and like I had like no intentions with this girl at all, And
Right.
The whole reason I went there was one of my good friends. I was like, if my friend's gonna be, if Vinny's gonna be there, I'll go. And somebody's like, Vinny's gonna be. I'm like, all right, I'll show up. So I was like, furthest thing from my mind, but throughout the course of the evening, something happened, and there was like an argument, and apparently her boyfriend ended up leaving, and there was it was a group of like 10 people. So, and it was her birthday, so that was weird. So everybody was kind of like, that's strange, but I'm very good friends with her girlfriend's best friend, or her best friend's boyfriend. That doesn't matter. Vinny is very close to her. So anyway, as people drop off over the course of the night, we ended up talking, and just I was like sort of the comfort, for that, and I felt bad because I was like, this is her birthday, like this is I don't, and somehow that spiraled. Now there's a balance that is very strange when you learn these things, because I later found out, through my own insecurity sort of contributing to the demise of this relationship, I later found out that her boyfriend left and they had an argument because he was insecure about me, because he thought I was after his girlfriend, which I actually wasn't, but ended up with his girlfriend because of the whole argument. And then through my insecurity, was the demise of that relationship. And I'm sure that is a cycle that has repeated many times in probably both of our lives in different. And so when you look at it, it's like, this is very strange the way that these things they play out. Was his insecurity about me, who just wanted to hang out with Vinny, like I just wanted to go to a bar with my friend, led to the demise of the relationship he was afraid of happening. And then later on, my insecurity helped lead to, now of course the girl has her own, lovely person, but she has her own side of the coin, right? She plays her part in as you do. And so I just became the next contributor to that cycle. Like the boyfriend was the previous contributor.
Right. It's interesting how that
very
happens.
Interesting, yeah.
It's like people say, well, why do I get attracted to unavailable people? Maybe if I show them love or show them a different side that they're used to,
Mm-hmm.
they'll start to thaw out and eventually see that there's a better way of living. But people with that heart, they forget they've entered into an alternate universe. They've entered
Yeah.
into an alternate
They're in the
universe.
Twilight Zone.
Yes, there is no sun. It's always dark. It's always raining. It's always full of turmoil. And with that superhero mentality, you don't notice any of that stuff while it's going on because it doesn't affect you. It
Yeah.
isn't until they cross back over to the sunshine and they leave you in that darkness that you realize I got too
And
far into it.
that is absolutely, it's very well put, because that's what happened. Is I that part of me, and this is where it gets tricky, because you talk about, or I talk about, and I'm sure you do as well, these types of things, and you want to caution people. It's like, they're like, so I'm not supposed to be loving or be there for my partner. You're like, no, not at all. Like, that's not at
Right.
all what. But it's like the motivation, where's like what is driving that behavior
Mhm.
becomes very important, and needs to be sort of finely distinguished, I think, because so
Right.
much of the, like, I some of my videos, I talk about detachment, and it's like, well, so I just don't care about anything. It's like, no, not at all. But
Yeah.
it's like the detaching my well-being from this situation so that I may better attend to this situation, rather than having it actually secretly I'm a puppet and this situation is pulling my strings, And
Mhm.
I don't want to face that inner void, so I'm actually it's what I'm trying to get out of it, not what I'm actually trying to give. It's this weird push-pull thing.
Right. Andrew, what do you think about this comment? It says, well, it was written to me, but it says 12 gauge
Yeah,
seeking emotional unavailability is about the one seeking it, in my opinion. They don't know how to be vulnerable due to inner child and can't participate in healthy relationships.
I think I think that can very much be true. I think there's once again, because there's both sides of the coin, right? There's the whole the attachment styles, they call them, right? Where
Yeah.
the various
Yeah.
ways we engage. In most people who are not secure, so assuming you have some sort of attachment that is out of balance, you're going to be either anxiously attached, which means I want more presence, more connection, more whatever, and then avoidant is like I want to kind of push this away a little bit. And as that comment said, the person who is secretly emotionally unavailable but may think of themselves as being emotionally available might be the more anxious one, who says, I'm going to go try to prove myself, as you said. I'm gonna be the Superman. I'm gonna stay, and then you might stick around until things actually
Right.
fall apart.
Right.
So I think that can absolutely be part of it. Is it's actually a compensation mechanism for the less secure person. But I also think that can show up as the other way too, because sometimes the person who is more avoidant, who seems to have more things like together, is actually equally afraid of that heart-to-heart vulnerability. It's just a different manifestation. One's like one's moving towards it trying to fill the void, and one's like moving away from it trying to avoid.
Right. Exactly. Here's a question for you, Andrew. Can I ask a question? Did the girl tell you that you were the reason the boyfriend left? Sorry, just being
um
lucky.
no, that's a good question. I think I don't. It came up like months later, so it was not like a early on in the relationship thing. And their relationship, I later found out, was like completely on the topic of avoidant and attachment, or avoidant and anxious attachment rather. This was a very good example, because this woman, like I said, very lovely lady. Not to talk badly about her, but has more of that avoidant tendency. And I later learned that their relationship had been on the rocks for like a whole year. But they were
Wow.
not willing to like they were basically living separate lives. And I was like, what? As the person who's like more prone to like the heart to heart, as the more anxious, like connected one, maybe the oversharer in the relationship, I was
Right,
like, how is
right.
that possible? Like a whole year. But so I later learned many other factors. But yeah, I think she told me, but I also later heard a couple other friends told me the same thing. So I had independent confirmation, I think.
Right. Well, let's play a little more of your video. You have some very interesting stuff in there. I want to play that.
Oh, please do. Yeah.
I think on some twisted level, I thought that, like, then they would
There you
never
go.
leave me, because that inner unworthiness thing was like, you need somebody who's going to stick around, right? You can't show them who you really are, or they'll leave you. So by fixing people, I could get them to stick around forever, because then they'd need me. It's kind of fucked up, really, but it's one of those methods that twisted, terrified inner child can say, you know what, I'm going to die if this stuff doesn't go right. I need to make sure it works a certain way. It's very unrealistic, perhaps, but it doesn't make it feel less intense in the moment. And this is a huge component of why there are so many dysfunctional relationships going around. It's because people are trying to live out those childhood patterns over and over and over through relationships. That inner child is still in there on repeat, looking for somebody out in the world who's going to fix them, who's going to solve their problems and meet their needs. But it's not mom and dad anymore, right? So they're kind of projecting themselves through your current day self as you go through and repeat the same patterns. You're still looking for somebody to come save you. And here's the thing. Nobody is going to come save you. There's nobody who's going to come fix you. There's nobody who's going to come solve all those problems and make you feel whole inside. Never going to happen. But there's great news. You can be that one person that you are looking for to fix you. Nobody else can. Turn that energy inward and realize you have the capability to save yourself. So how do you do that? You need to go back and heal the wound yourself. And the very first step to this process is simply awareness, becoming aware of these patterns and behaviors that we are running on autopilot. Because until we know they're there, how are we supposed to change them, right? Like, how do you fix a problem that you cannot see? So something you can do right off the bat is whenever you feel triggered, or whenever you notice yourself having a disproportionate reaction, maybe you get really angry or jealous or sad about something that was not objectively that big of a deal, take a second to notice that happening, and then pull your perspective back just for a split second and ask, where is this coming from? Why am I doing this? Is this helpful at all? And you realize probably not. And then you go, well, why is this a part of me? Like, where does this come from? Where does the voice of that inner critic come from? That you're not good enough, you suck. Well, what are you doing there? You're not good enough for that person. Oh, you could never do that. Don't try. Where do those feelings of shame and unworthiness come from? Where does that guilt and hatred and anger come from within you? So step one is simply to start noticing, to become aware of those patterns that are running under your normal perception that you normally don't see. Just start to notice when you do things and say, why did I do that? Just be curious. Just have a little bit of fun with it. It's kind of weird, but just go with it for a while. That is step one. You can do that passively throughout your day-to-day life. Really easy. You don't even have to put very much effort into it. Just notice it. Be like, oh, curious.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, awareness is a beautiful thing, but it's also a scary thing.
Oh,
It's a scary thing for individuals that have never had to stop long enough to focus on themselves. Like you were saying at the very beginning, being people pleasers, we're so, there's individuals that are so used to making sure everybody in the room is happy. And that's where the codependency comes in with the inner child work. Is if you're unhappy, oh gosh, I'm happy, but I gotta be just like you to show support. So therefore, I'm going to turn the unhappiness. I'm unhappy too. And I wanted to relay something when you were talking about the mother and the father not being there anymore. Well, what ends up happening to people as well, when they get with a broken person, and I love that we're talking relationships here, but this could happen in any arena. If you get with a broken individual and they take on a role of a father figure to you. Let's say you're dating somebody and they're a support system for you, and your dad was a support system, and they're financially secure, and your dad was, but
Mhm.
after a while, think about it. Who really wants to date their dad? Or vice
I mean,
versa.
there you have your daddy or mommy issues in a nutshell, right? Is
Yeah, exactly.
seeking out
Exactly.
repetition of that same pattern. And yeah, it's very interesting. And I want to speak to, because in the video I noticed I said, no one's coming to save you. And I've on a recent, I just have this in my mind because I made a video the other day about sort of this sort of similar, not through the lens of the inner child, but about just like our relationship dynamics
Right.
specifically.
Right.
Um, and one of the things that can often get sort of misinterpreted, because it is a very fine definition, is like, you don't want to, I'm not advocating you swing too far to the other side, as the person who is anxious, you learn about your tendency to like people please, and you're like, all right, great, I'm just gonna like be the avoidant person, and then everybody will like me. And you're like, you sort of playing the other side of the game. So in saying like nobody's coming to save you, it's not to say like, relationships aren't great, or you can't have vulnerable, authentic, real, like empowering connection. Like,
Mm-hmm.
it's more that we tend to block that on our own from the trying to get it from somebody else. I block myself from the authentic connection that I'm actually seeking, because I can't be my you form a relationship with, like, I'm pretending to be somebody and I'm hoping you fix some of my stuff. It's not, but secretly I know who I really am, and secretly you know who you really are. So like, we never really have that deeper connection between like that real, vulnerable, authentic part. And that's where it gets tough, because it's like there is a little bit of bearing your soul that's necessary, not only to the other person but to yourself. And I think that's where it sort of ties back to the inner child, is like the reconciliation of those doubts or insecurities that we tend to compensate for through relationship. Or relationship might just be another manifestation of those addictions or those avoidance, the escape. There's people who will have a new girlfriend, new boyfriend every month, and that might just be their flavor of escape. You get to meet a new person, you get the thrill, and they distract you for a
Oh,
little while.
of course,
And then as
yeah.
soon as that, as soon as you go back to your flatline, like you said, people can't hold still. You can't face that, sit down with that awareness. As soon as that inner tingling starts to bubble up again, I got to get out of here and do the next thing.
Yeah. It's usually the 6 week period where the representative kind of shows they leave and the real person walked through the door, and you wake up one day next to the real person, you're like, who are you? Where was the person that I went to sleep with last night?
Yeah.
Or how come you're talking to me like that? Or what makes you think that that's okay? You've never acted this way before. And all of a sudden, it's almost like you're being held hostage by someone you don't even know. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
a very strange, and it's like you're being held hostage almost by your own conditioning, your own programming. That's like, I guess this is my life now. Like, there
Yeah.
that it it's very interesting, the dynamics of which we will chase things, and then we get them. Maybe we're like a it's like a dog, you like throw something and they'll go fetch it, but maybe it's a lazy dog. They'll run too fast as they can to get it, and then they're just like, now what? Like I have a dog, he won't play fetch. He'll run to the stick, and then he'll just be like, I don't know, what do you want from me now? Like, I'm not gonna bring this back. We get it, and then we're like, what's the next
Yeah.
thing? I want to go chase something else. I don't want to bring this, I don't want the long term. I want the chase. And so that's that high, that we follow.
And many individuals are more into the thought of being than actually being, just like what you just said. They're more into the thought of being in love or having somebody there than actually
Absolutely.
having that there, because then the fun ends, so to speak. All of a sudden, the excitement of not knowing what to expect, and then it becomes monotonous and predictable and
Mhm.
consistent. For a lot of people, they can't handle that. They need the uncertainty, the chaos, the drama, the
Yeah.
uncertainty of whether you really care, even though they want you to say you care. And when you say you care, then all of a sudden it's like, oh, boop, you pop that balloon, and it's time to go fill up
Yeah.
another balloon. You know?
I do one-on-one coaching, and not to reveal too much for confidentiality reasons, but one of my clients has talked about his relationship with women, very similar. In the beginning, there's that magical, potential of like texting, like we could, it's almost childish. It's like that fantasy. We could run away
Yes,
together. We'll live in the, let's go. And it's very idyllic to think about because it feeds into that like inner child fantasy in a certain way, which is
yes.
like that escapism that something's going to come alleviate this burden I feel like I'm carrying around. And that is so addicting, like that is like that's like the that's like pure heroin. Like give me some of that now, because
Yeah, yeah.
for that part of you that feels like it's been dragging around this repressed whatever, that person coming in saying, hey, we're gonna go, travel the world, we're gonna, and the newness of that compared to the physical reality of what you're used to is just like
Well, it's innocent.
so
It's
gripping.
innocent. Too, because in reality, people do not understand this concept. When we talk inner child, that's bringing out the playfulness, the innocence, the intriguing, the mysterious,
Mhm.
all that. So that's what a child brings to the table a lot of times. Well,
Absolutely, yeah,
when you're attracted to somebody, that's what they're bringing to the table. That's what
totally.
attracts you.
And it makes you, people who have been stuck in a what they feel like is a rut, that
Mm.
brings a little bit of life back to their life. The energy that like, and I think that's a big part of why the healing is so important, right? Is to have that more
Yeah,
often than not, because we want to have more of that life energy and that enthusiasm, but not necessarily in that projection externalized form, but rather like how can we better integrate that so that we're not so dependent and bouncing up, like you said, bouncing around like a ping pong ball looking for the
yes,
next
yes,
hit.
exactly. Because it's almost like I watched the video. I don't know if it was your video that you were discussing, but I remember hearing not to isolate yourself while you're healing, because what happens is you get trapped in the reality of what your future person is, and when you leave your comfort zone, you forget that you haven't really healed the old person. So what happens is the first time somebody, it's almost like starving, and somebody hands you a hamburger, you're going to devour it, and you're going to be
Absolutely.
like, oh my goodness, you're my savior, I love you, I care about you, I
Yes.
love bomb, you're just like love bombing them to death. And if this other person has had that same experience, then it's the infatuation of the attachment that makes it exciting, thrilling, mysterious, all these childlike emotions.
Absolutely.
And over time, you can't sustain that, because real life, there's moments of that, but in reality, bills, work, problems with health, families, all these things get in the way sometimes. And you can't just plug in all the time expecting it to be exciting like that.
Yeah.
And that's an unrealistic expectation that people have when they're looking for a partner. They're looking for somebody to meet that other half of them, where they're so incapable or unwilling to do that for themselves, just like what you said in the video. You are your best ally.
Yeah.
I learned a long time ago that the best connection you'll ever have with anything or anybody will be with yourself.
Hmm.
And it
It's
seems very selfish. It seems very selfish to think that way. But just like we were talking about having a stability threshold to go back to when trauma or pain hits us, we have to remember that we can build ourselves back up. We don't need something out there to assist us, maybe support,
Of course. Yeah, of
but
course.
but
Support,
many
and that's
times,
where.
yeah,
Okay, go ahead.
yeah, but many times people say, "Well, I hate men, and all men are trash, and this and that and the other," and then they're not working on themselves. They say, "Well, I can't talk to you right now because I'm working on myself. I need time alone. I need this. I need." And then
Mhm.
2 weeks later, you hear from them. They're like, "Oh my God, I met the best guy. He is loving, caring, kind. He's he knows how to communicate. He
Yeah.
listens. He does this." And you're like, "In 2 weeks, you fixed your problems. You healed."
Yeah. And
What
it's
do you
it's
think,
like
Andrew? What do you think?
we healed 1 or 2% of the 100% we need to work on, and then we got distracted, you know? And
Yeah,
it's that's one of those areas, to bring it back to that, point about awareness, right? Is
yeah,
I think relationships are one of the areas where awareness really does go a long way, because if you are paying attention, right? The person who's paying attention and actually committed to that process as much as they can,
right.
um, will go into that next relationship and actually see a pattern, or they will learn, they'll learn something from it, or the relationship might not be, the jumping into the next relationship isn't necessarily the problem. It's like it goes back to the addiction thing, goes back to the escape, right? It's like, if you're just doing it because you get into that insecure zone, and then we got to jump back to where I feel at home or comfortable, um that's where it, starts to be the loop that repeats itself over and over, right?
Hmm.
And then I
So
wanted to speak to something else you said. I
go
just
ahead.
I, I
Go
I
ahead.
just recurred. The other thing, right, in finding that inner wholeness, one of the things that we talk about a lot culturally, um, and I think really appeals to the wounded inner child dynamic, and you
Mhm.
talked about it quite a bit there, is the other half, the soulmate, the whatever. And it occurred to me, as you were talking about the importance of not necessarily using a person as that crutch, but having the wholeness within yourself. It's like, what, a marriage or a relationship, whatever you want to call it, is, they say two people become one, not two halves become one. It's when
Right,
it's
right.
when two wholes become a greater than their part, so to speak. Is that, and of course that has a lot to do with intention, because the 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 downside that people can take when it comes to inner work or improvement or development, right, is like, it's breeding ground for that perfectionism to strike again, because it's like, all right,
Yeah.
now I know the problem, I just got to sharpen myself up for the next 30 years, and then I'll be perfect and everybody will. So it's like action tempered with that awareness, I think, is a good starting point, at least,
So you tell your people, I guess, I don't know if you refer to them as patients, clients, whatever you refer to them
Mhm.
as. Do you tell them that, it's okay to feel lonely? Do you to while you're healing it, that's part of the process to understand during that lonely time, it's not the end of the world, but it's a time to reflect, a time to meditate, a time to pray, or get in touch with their inner self to
Yeah, I
heal
think
those broken wounds.
I think as with all things, right? There's balance. What is the
Hmm.
Tao, the middle way?
Yeah, yeah,
The extremes tend to be too much, so people do go full, monk mode or whatever, isolation, and I think that can be harmful. But like you say, you want to make sure as much as possible that you're not jumping back into compensation mode as soon as humanly possible. And
right.
so a lot of introspection comes from isolation. And one of the things is, like, so often we are fighting off that loneliness or feeling of isolation. that it's like implicit. It's already decided that it's something we need to run away from, right?
Mhm.
And internally for me, I had for the longest time, for the first quarter of a century of my life at least, never even occurred to me that like that was not a thing I should run away from. And
Right,
to look
right.
at that loneliness or isolation is like, this is fine. This is normal, like not to be completely isolated out of fear or avoidance, because that, of course, is the other side of that pendulum. But when you
Right.
are able to reflect on things alone and be like, what is it that I'm constantly running? Because that's where you find the stuff bubbles up, maybe, that you've constantly been running from and trying to escape with all these different, toys or the new shiny
Yeah.
thing.
Yes, exactly. You said it really well there. You know, it's easy to get into that isolation, like you said, go in full monk mode. Um, but try to remember, it's okay to make new friends. It's okay to make friends of the opposite genre, but set your boundaries where you let people know your honest intent. Hey,
Hmm.
at this point in my life, I'm really not looking for anything. I really need a friend. I need
Yeah.
someone who will listen, somebody that I can talk to. But please don't take it the wrong way and think that I'm just looking for you to be the one. I have multiple support systems in my life, and if you can't do that, then maybe you need to stay with the same sex. Like
Hmm.
get some girlfriends to go out and you can talk about things and try to pick out positive women in your life that have grown through these traumatic areas in their lives, or that they've got a little wisdom behind them to assist while you're healing, because when you heal,
Absolutely.
just like you said, you heal from the inside out. You don't heal from the outside in.
Yeah.
You
That's a
know?
that's a beautiful, once again, I mean, even physically, right? Like
Yeah,
it's a inner driven process. And I think, to continue that metaphor, the addiction, the compulsion to, that's the band-aid, right? We're constantly
yes, yes.
artificially covering up the
They
wound.
say,
Yeah.
just rip it off.
And then yeah, you jump to the next thing and you're ripping your band-aid off again and trying a new band-aid. Well, this band-aid didn't work, maybe, and
Exactly.
that, and gracefully, I suppose, life can play out so that we do somehow stumble forward as we learn more through these. Not everybody is doomed, thankfully, to stay in these inner child patterns. You do
Yeah,
develop over time. Um, but I think once you start to see, especially speaking to your point about addiction, and addiction not as what we would societally typically think of as addiction, which is almost exclusively like substance abuse, is what society, like addiction is.
right,
But
right.
it's like, and of course that is a problem we deal with culturally, but I think it's way more impactful to like at least attempt to understand and have some awareness of like, what is the underlying motive that is being, compensated for in all these different ways. And so often it is that we feel alone or not enough, or that solitude. And there is tempered with that at the same time the belief that that is awful, right? So if I'm
Right.
alone and that is irreconcilably bad, which potentially maybe that goes back to the childhood, the needing other people around, the needing that support system.
Here's
So
another comment, Andrew. It
yeah, yeah.
says it's hard when you're with someone a long time and keep the romance going because life gets in the way. At the same time, it's kind of nice to have that comfort also.
Hmm. And I think really that comes down to, I mean, that's tricky because I have not been in over. I've been in one or two two longer term relationships. So I'm not, take this with a grain of salt because I'm not speaking with
Right.
the world's most experience. I think that also has to do, in some essence, though, just the way we relate to things that have been around for a long time. We tend to take things for granted a lot in life, and then, which essentially means I have gathered enough information of this person to like create a mental construct, an accurate-ish idea, and I know what to expect. And they likewise have done the same for me. And that's sort of where that comfort comes from, right? Because we know what to expect from this person. We know what we think they're going to do. We know how we think this situation's going to go, what they're going to order for dinner, whatever it is. But you do lose a little bit of that mystery and that wonder. So I think it's what I attempt, or at least going forward will attempt to put into my my own long-term relationships is, yes, of course, this person is the same person, but to realize that, life constantly provides us those new opportunities, change, things are always sort of different. And if we get too fixated on thinking of this person as their same old self, or more importantly, as me and this person and our relationship as its same old thing,
Right.
then that becomes the security. But then you're never like, I'm going to take a cooking class, because it's like, well, they won't think it's cool if I take a cooking class and they won't want to go. But you like, that becomes the death of the new thing, because we think we know what the old thing is. So we start to, that comfort zone slowly eats up the new exciting, until you're in a bit of a rut. And so that's a tricky balance to navigate, because it's very easy to have things that, or people that have been around for a very long time.
Well, let me ask you another
absolutely.
question, Andrew. It's a myth out there that women only are attracted to bad boys.
Mm-hmm.
Have you? What do you think? What do you think the myth behind that is? I mean, it's not
Well, I will say,
all women.
It's false for a certain degree, because I have fought with being far too much of a good boy for a long time, and women have been attracted to me. So it's not only that, but it might be the specific, manifestation of that. I think probably if we're talking inner child, I would imagine there's some correlation with the provider, maybe a little bit more of an emotionally distant father, being the person you could never really prove yourself to, or who you never felt seen, maybe by that figure who was idealized, at least in the mind of a child, as like the hyper masculine, provider who met the needs. And
Right.
so the bad boy then becomes the projection of masculinity, as like breaks the rules, does their own thing, has that strong, maybe misguided, but like strong pillar of self, like they know who they are, and that confidence kind of is like a homing beacon to people who aren't quite that confident. If I don't really know who I am, and funny enough, as the guy who's been the good guy, this was like in that relationship I mentioned, it was almost the reverse, like very outgoing, confident woman. And I, as the kind of insecure guy, was like, wow, she's the one who I need to pair with. And it's like the same, not that she was like a bad girl, like she was very relatively mild-mannered, all things considered, but personality wise, she did have that outgoing confidence, like, I know what I want, I know who I am, and that like inner authority, wherever that comes from, because once again, that can come from the avoidance side of that anxious avoidance spectrum, where people are like, I can't trust anybody, I can't let anybody get close, they're gonna hurt me, so I have to push everybody, but that can attract the person who's looking for that security, or seeming security. That's how it appears to me, at least.
You mentioned that trust right there, and that's one thing that gets damaged. And you mentioned it in your video as well. That once trust is damaged in yourself, it's hard for you to to reach out of your comfort zone. You build a wall around you, and you kind of find little minuscule areas to exist behind that wall.
Mm-hmm.
That trust has been so damaged that you don't know how to repair yourself. It
Yeah.
starts from within. It's the healing again. You must learn
Yeah, that's good. Because
how
you're
to
it's
love
inside
your
your wall.
yeah. You must learn how to love yourself. Like it when we're young, we fall down, we scrape our knees. Usually our mom scoops us up, wipes it off,
Yeah.
kissing on us. It's gonna be better, wiping it off. And we learn to have somebody there to pick up the pieces. But as adults, you don't feel comfortable a lot of times going back and talking to your mom about having a broken heart or
Yeah.
all this and that because they're going to take your side and they're going to be biased. So you don't learn anything. You need to I always tell my clients to go through the whole process, feel it. As much
Mm-hmm.
as it stings, as much as it hurts, as much as you feel like you're going to die, you're not going to die.
Yeah.
You're not going to die.
And
Feel the
even
process.
more importantly, just to add on to that, you're not going to, and it's sort of like the very first thing I said in my story, the feeling of like my entanglement with this story, right? My entanglement with what I had imagined my life was going to look like. It,
Right.
it in a sense, it is the death of that. That is what's dying. And I thought that was me. So I feel like I'm dying because that is
Yeah.
dying. But
Mhm.
that's also when you're, and it's so beautiful that you instruct people that to as much as they can to stay with that, because
Right.
that's like the flame that burns away the impurities, that stuff that you have falsely been holding on to. And I think when that flame, we don't want to look at it, that's when we jump back to the next, we jump back into the pattern as soon as we can to distract ourselves. But when you have that isolation, that staying with the pain, that's like the allowing that to sort of burn away the stuff that isn't you.
Well, you mentioned being whole a while ago. And during the process of healing, you're actually walking backwards in time, healing. So when you get to your inner child that was damaged, you're able to pick up that child and become one.
Mm-hmm.
That child enmeshes in you and starts to grow again with the love that you have for yourself. And I know that sounds way out there, but it's possible. It's possible to pick up the old you and enmesh yourself with you to grow into the whole person. Because what happens in relationships or jobs or chasing financial security or whatever, we become so enmeshed in these things. And if they ever end, this is our identity a lot of times.
Absolutely.
So we rip apart from these things and we don't know where we began, where they began or where they left off. So we're unable to bring back the basic foundation of balance that you discussed so that we can start to heal.
Yeah.
Because I've heard so many times people say, I gave so much to this job, or I gave so much to this relationship, or I put so much energy in this, and I feel cheated.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like a part of me has been taken away.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's a subtle implication there, right? Which is, and
Mhm.
once again, fine definitions, because you can fall off the balance beam easily. But the implication, right? I feel cheated is that this was supposed to fulfill some part of me, right? Like the implication is that I did my part. Where's my, my half of the reward here? Like what? And that's what I felt in that relationship. That's what I assume, most people in that anxious avoidant trap, you feel like, all right, I supported this person. Where's, I was the emotional Superman. I did my bit, like, where's
Right,
my,
right.
And that's when it becomes tricky. It's like when you are subtly in order to also hopefully receive, it sort of taints the energy dynamic a little bit. And that's where
Yeah.
I think that wounded inner child, and you mentioned like going back and healing that, I think unless we have done that, typically what we tend to do is we feel bitter, and it's sort of a manifestation of that inner child as our reaction to whatever current situation goes wrong. So I lose my job, I lose my family, and like bam, I'm instantly back to, where I felt inadequate and alone at 7 years old. I might not realize that, but my feelings will be very much in line with that same sort of pattern. I'll feel, oh, I can't, what's the point? I'm incapable of dealing with this situation, which maybe you were when you were 7, but like, it's
Right.
it as soon as that artificial sort of pillar that's been holding up that security falls away, then you're back to, okay, you're back to where you were stuck before, which maybe you have actually always been. You've just been covering it up,
Yeah, exactly. There's so many avenues that branch out from this inner child trauma or lack of attachment to your inner child. I mean, there's the trauma bonding, there's, all the avenues of abuse, addiction, isolation, even taking your own life. It gets
Absolutely.
so bad for some people that they can't break the mental stronghold that they have in their mind that keep telling them, hey, you're never going to get better. You've been like this forever. You're not going to heal. All those people that talk all that stuff, they're just talking and they don't know what they're talking about. You have to, I mean, there's been times in my car that I've had such bad days, and I've been in not so much lately, but in the past, I was in such a turmoil, having my mind so full of turmoil that I had to stop and scream, stop, shut up.
Yeah.
Like I was yelling to another person, you know what I mean? Because it was so bad, and it breaks that attachment.
Yeah, it's amazing how much I think it gets very nuanced to talk about, because I find it fascinating. Like for me,
Mhm.
I think spirituality has like a weird tinge to it, because it encompasses everything that is outside of like the norm can be called spiritual, so it's like
Right.
huge bucket to like. But the way I interpret spirituality is like, what does it mean to be in touch with the closest thing to reality or truth that I can find? Like what is real, which is counterintuitive to a lot of people who think of spirituality, which is like this far off, woo, less real.
Right.
But yeah, exactly. So I like to make that distinction. But as you mentioned, like that question of identity, like, is so important, because we can identify ourselves with so many things or situations or people and we act as if that is part of us, and that cascades into so many, I mean, anger, right? Like you insult me, you say, oh, you'll never grow to be anything, you're never going to amount to anything, and it seems so obvious that should insult a person. Like, of course that would
Right.
insult a person. But the implication is that I have a story that I care about maintaining in the eyes of this person. I want to amount to something like there's so much subtle subtext that is contained within the hurt that we feel when your job is threatened, and a person, the stock market crashes and people jump out of buildings in the 80s. And
Yeah.
it's such a removal from actual life. Like it feels like your life is over and the world's ending. But the world is almost exactly the same as it was yesterday. The birds are still chirping. The sun still came up. There's still, it's like only that story, which we have been so incredibly enmeshed with, is dying. And that feels like death. And I think that so many people who struggle with that suicidal ideation,
Right.
I think that plays into it. It's like when that story is so strong, but I believe it. I'm so entangled in that negative mesh that, I want to kill what I believe to be me, but is not actually, the essence. But it's that story. It's that thing that's taken such a life of its own. It's become such a monster that I don't think I can overcome it anymore. It's
Right.
very strange, but I find it like so fascinating and honestly crucial to understand, like, because it seems to me that so much of life is dependent on these assumptions that nobody really questions, like we don't ask. And so much of our culture, our society, our work environment, that, you might feel afraid of your boss or have a rivalry with this coworker or whatever. And so much of that is based on these ideological constructs, which might, of course, be helpful in certain circumstances, but they have their right place, and that is not, they need to be put into correct balance with the rest of your life. Otherwise, you get consumed by the
Oh yeah.
story.
Oh yeah. And one last thing, Andrew, I've really enjoyed this. I've enjoyed your mind, kind of picking at it a
My
little
pleasure. It's been
bit.
great. Yeah.
You know, you're a great communicator. I enjoy that. But one last thing, one thing that I see in the chat a lot of time, not necessarily in mine, but I've become very mindful to not trigger people in the chat due to not knowing what level of stressors they're going through, what
Hmm.
level of misunderstanding that they've had to deal with, and maybe they're just trying to get away from that. And the last thing you want to do is hurt somebody,
Absolutely.
by
And
word or by, you know, just being hurtful as a person up here on these panels.
yeah. And I think as much as you can, right? Like starting with, I'm certainly no angel, so
Oh, me
apologies
neither.
if I
Me
offended
neither.
it. But starting with compassion as much as you can, right? And um, understanding like everybody is just doing their best, and to give them a little bit of grace. And that was a big lesson for me early on in YouTube, was like dealing with negative comments. And that whole process going on in me, right? I used to like, I want people to like these things. I'm seeing
Right.
like like I need to, and for the longest time, maybe due to the growing up with the intellectual family, I was always like very quick-witted. So I was always the guy like, you come at me, you better not miss, because I'll take you down with a comeback.
Right.
And like learning like, no, this person is just like, they're just living their own life. They're coming from their own level of awareness. And that it's actually revealing within me my own, where there's still that insecurity, that tendency to be like, no, I gotta show them how right I am. Is
Yeah.
that was a fascinating experience for me, was having that realization of like, oh no, I don't need to be threatened by these people, because they are doing the best they can with what they have, and maybe they have a valid perspective. And so I
Right.
think what I have learned, at least, is doing your very best to start with compassion and some grace for where people are, and equally crucial, doing that, this is harder for me, but doing that to myself, like giving
Yeah.
myself that.
Exactly. Well, another thing is I'm a visual person, so I visualize being on panel, like standing in the middle of the road or something, and there's all these people circling around me.
Mhm.
And every now and then somebody will yell something from the crowd. You suck.
Yeah.
This is what I think about it. No, this is right. No, this is right. And you hear all the constant chatter going on because they're talking amongst themselves. And you're
Mhm.
trying to say something that you value as important. And you have to kind of maintain order in the whole circle. But the truth of the matter is, the best thing you can do is let go.
Yeah.
Just let go. Let it be what it's going to be. As long as nobody hurt themselves or, um, or hurts or being hurtful or anything, let
Yeah.
it go. Let people be who
Absolutely.
they are. Because so many times we see in society and as well as on these platforms that people try to control people.
Hmm. Yeah.
No, you can't
So
talk
much
like that in
fear,
here. Yeah,
and
yeah,
fear and control, and it's understandable because that's we're all. I'm certainly not free of it. We're all conditioned to some degree, right? To have certain like panic and the proper way and all that. But I think that a lot of the time, although that may be intended to benefit connection, like that may the intent might be like we can't say certain things or we can't because we need to be connected. I think the most honest connection though does have to encompass those differences of opinion or those because at the end of the day like we're all people, right? We all so as
right.
much as we differ, like we might be completely opposite points of view, but you are far more like me than almost we've looked around space for a couple decades with telescopes and we haven't found anything nearly like everybody else, so we have a lot more in common. But we tend to get so fixated on those differences, and that really breeds a lot of divisiveness. I feel like,
Yes,
but
it does.
to your point on letting go, because I've made a lot of videos on the topic of letting go and the book David Hawkins' Letting Go, which I'm not talking about anymore because I got a copyright claim. But I digress. But I was reading over the Fourth of over the July weekend. I was out. My grandparents have an old lake place, and they brought out for like the first time in my lifetime. They've had a sailboat in storage for like it's like a little sailboat, but for my whole life it's been in storage, and they brought it out this year. And my grandpa gave me this old book. It was like probably from like the 1950s, and it was
Oh
like
wow.
it was basically the equivalent of like Sailing for Dummies. It was just a little pamphlet, and one of the first things I opened up and I was reading, it says if you're sailing and you're struggling and the wind is harsh and everything's going crazy, you could just remember you can always let go, because if you
Yeah.
let go of the sail goes into the wind and it loses all the power and the boat stabilizes. And I was like, what a fantastic! I didn't realize sailing would be the way to get that. But but
Yeah.
it was just it was like eye opening. It was like, oh yeah, you're lost in the wind. You think you need to hold on and you're afraid and everything, but it's like sometimes you just if you just let
Yeah.
go,
Let go. Let
yeah,
go. Yeah. It's very awesome. Well, Andrew, I've enjoyed it, man. I appreciate you
yeah,
taking the time to come up on my panel, and
absolutely,
uh,
my pleasure.
I'm going to open the chat up for any questions they might have for you, and I'll take about 5 minutes or so for
Yeah, for
questions.
sure.
And if you have any questions for Andrew, please put them in the chat, and he can answer them. Dun, 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 dun. I don't see any yet.
If not, that's okay too.
Yeah, yeah. They'll probably start asking questions once we sign off or something. We're about to. Hold on,
That's
hold on. I
okay.
want to ask Andrew this.
That's okay. We can always do it again if need be. You know.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I'm sure with your permission, um, I will definitely, use some of your videos in the future for
Oh
educational
yeah, feel free.
value, if that's okay.
Feel free.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, my face is
Here's
all over So it would be hard to not have people know who, it's it's a I don't I are those photos yours? All of them except this one. This one, the little blue one, is a photographer named Alex Stroll. He's very big on Instagram. He's one of my favorite photographers, though. But everything else, yes, I took.
Okay, there we go.
Photography is my my passion, perhaps. But it led well into video because I have a little bit of a background for knowledge of cameras and all that. My background, schooling, etc. In the regards to what we have talked about today, not too much. I mostly self-educated. I mean, I did go to, I have a 2-year associate's degree, so nothing too fancy in terms of the collegiate education, but I am a big reader, and I have, my spread of books, which I have read most of, and there's more hidden out of camera you can't see. And I've always been a bit of a self-starter. Like, I will devour information on things I'm interested in, very much like want to learn. I was homeschooled as well, so I think that partially feeds into it. And having that sort of like hunger for learning, I very much love deepening understanding about things. And so that, I think, really, when I had the breakup experience, provided an excellent gateway into, because all of a sudden I was like hungry for information about everything related to like letting go or inner work, because it was like opening this new door that I had never. It was almost like, people talk about like you've been walking around in a dream your whole life, and you wake up and you like look around, you're like, oh, like I've been assuming everything was this way. So mostly in terms of what we have discussed, self-educated, and just a lot of reading, a lot of books, a lot of introspection, inner work, journaling, that type of thing, and kind of finding my own conclusions and then comparing those with other people as well. And I really enjoy that kind of intersection of sort of like self-help, but also spirituality, and then psychology, and how that all, basically, I would say like life, it's like, really, if we get down to it, it's the essence of what it means to be alive and be a human. And the journey we have here is something that I am just like incredibly passionate about. And that really has motivated a lot of my inner journey, and then expressed through my videos and coaching work I do as well, as a relation springing from that.
Andrew, that's amazing, man, because you articulate it very well. I can tell that you've read, and you can, you have awesome comprehension skills to be able to, put it on a video without, having a teleprompter. I don't know if you don't have one right now, but I wouldn't think you have a teleprompter going on.
No.
I did the same thing as far as reading before I became a therapist. I'd read everything, trying to find the answers to understanding my being. It's like you get a point where you're at right now, and probably when you were going through that breakup, you probably hit that wall, and you're like, man, I can't go any further. I got to find the answer.
Yeah.
What do I need to do so this doesn't happen again? And then,
absolutely.
Have you been able to go back and thank that woman for breaking your heart?
Oh, yeah. I don't know if I sent her. To be fair, she didn't. Well, I don't remember if she responded. So, but I did send her a text saying, this is probably a crazy thing to say, because I never would have thought I wanted this. But that has been one of, and when that sort of insecure inner child still pops up, I do my best. I don't mean to portray myself as the enlightened master over here, right? I think we're all still works in progress.
Of course, of course.
And somebody said, beautifully said, we are both a masterpiece and a work in progress. But I learned from that experience that like so much of what that small, afraid ego self wants to resist is what is actually going to kind of crack open the walls, so to speak, of that, we put up those inner walls, right? It's the fear of breaking through those walls that keeps us inside. And when those things happen, though, that shake us up a little bit and make us feel like the world's falling apart, by all means, compassion, love, acceptance, those are all incredibly important to have for people in those times. And then also the knowing that out of this will spring something new. Like this will lead to an insight, or there will be a next chapter that is informed that I quite literally never would have thought was possible.
Right.
It's in that here's what here's what you don't know, and then there's the huge you don't know what you don't know, right? It's that don't know I don't know it stuff that
Right.
that life will throw at you, and is a huge challenge, but also in that I think the opportunity, right, to see things a different way.
So the second relationship that you discussed, were you able to be more insightful? Did it hurt it
I
bad?
think I think ever since this has been almost 3 years since that girl and I broke up. So I think I have been a lot more insightful. I've definitely been a lot more secure. I wouldn't say perfectly secure, but I have been significantly more chill. I think I'm a lot more zen these days, as much
Right.
as I gesture around.
Yeah.
My relationship anxiety has come down a lot just based on the realization that it's not this person's job to be somebody for me, and that allows a lot more leeway into, well, who are they? What is this actually like? Do I actually like who they are? And that has been very freeing, I think. And in addition, there was a couple times where I did notice, and I wouldn't have previously had that awareness to understand, oh, you're caught in that sort of inner child reactive pattern. But something would happen and I would feel that like trigger, and being able to be like, oh, my bad. That wasn't actually me. I think that was coming from this inner feeling. It's not on you. You didn't
Right.
do anything wrong.
Right.
And being able to own that a little bit more has been very, very helpful. So, like I said, it's still a work in progress, if a masterpiece, whole and working on it at the same time, right? But I
Yeah,
think
exactly.
overall that experience was quite literally life changing, which is funny because as breakups go, it was relatively tame, but it was just the emotional inner hope and dreams I had built up on this illusion, essentially, of like this high of how awesome the giddy feeling of this new relationship with this person was. And all of that falling away, having nothing really to stand on, and feeling like, who am I even? Like, what even am I doing anymore? Absolutely terrifying, but also incredibly freeing. So that's the strange dichotomy that life presents
Yeah.
us,
Yeah, well, it sounds like you've grown immensely from that pain, and that's what we always have to remember is it's not where we start, it's where we finish. And sometimes that finish line, you don't even realize how far you've come until you've, continued the journey for a while and you look back and you're like, man, I got through that just fine and I've been able to grow into a different person and I'm happy with who I am today and the wound is not opened anymore. It's not a constant throbbing that I need to get it fixed. It's not anything that needs to be externally looked into. It's all internal, and I'm being guided by something greater than myself.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And then, that paired with when you feel yourself getting in that trigger spot, having that little bit of awareness, little bit of love and compassion for yourself to say, like you said, go back and say, hey, buddy, hey,
Yeah,
hey, friend, I, we can work through this. Like, and instead of falling into that, what either tends to be self-punishment or self-avoidance, maybe, to do your best to face that situation with, all right, we got this.
yeah,
To not get too caught up in that past story. And of course, that whole thing is an ongoing journey for many people, and as I say, myself included. So just having that little bit of self-grace as much as you can manage, I think, goes a long way.
right. If you're younger and you're watching this, do understand that some of the videos that you might see about being distant and exclusive and being chased after, those things are not realistic. Be true to yourself, and if somebody's gonna accept you for who you are and your flaws, then chances are that they're the real deal. You don't want to be
Absolutely.
selling a product to somebody that you can't fulfill every day for the rest of the time that you're with them. You have to be true
And,
to you and don't fall
yeah.
into the games.
I was gonna say, if you see one of my videos with a thumbnail like that, rest assured it's clickbait. Because 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 people, and that was, to be honest, that's one of the things. Not I don't think, I think there were a couple threads. Like I was interested in some other things that led to spirituality exploration as well. But one of the videos I clicked on fresh out of the breakup was like how, letting go makes them want you more or whatever. And I'm like,
Yeah,
yes, give it to me. Let me know how to get this girl back, right?
of
And
course, of
so
course.
so I have a couple of videos that are like, why letting go makes you more attractive. And it's really like, it does, but that's because you are being yourself and you're not, basically everything we talked about today, right? And it's like,
Yes, exactly.
it's to hopefully entrap people, as I was entrapped into what I not necessarily what I thought I wanted, but what I really what I really needed in the moment, was not the how do you get the girl back, because that's the band-aid. That's going back to the same old how do I get my fix as soon as possible because I don't want to feel this.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, because the love emotion is a pleasure that we learn to kind of enjoy.
Hmm.
Love is an emotion that is unexplainable. And once we experience that for real, it's almost like we chase that in everything that we are about for the rest of our lives,
Yeah.
whether it be in and it's very hard to break that. You cannot overdose on love. You have to be realistic and take little shots every now and then.
Hmm.
It's okay to feel some pain along the way. It's okay to feel disappointment. But when the love comes, that's when you reach into yourself and say, okay, it's time to fill up myself with some love, because I've depleted
Hmm.
myself and let all these negative emotions take over.
Yeah. One of my favorite books, just like sort of intro to, is it's The Untethered Soul by a guy named Michael Singer. But one of the things he talks about is, he says, I don't care so much what makes your heart open. What we want to talk about is all the things that are making your heart close when they don't need to, and how all the external attachments and everything we identify with, right? That causes, heart closes. I don't feel that connection. I don't feel that love anymore because and it's like letting go a little bit and bringing, to wrap it up with the inner child, that love, compassion, but even more so maybe curiosity, right? Is
Right, right.
we tend to, so at least I do, tend to so heavily prejudge things. It's probably the intellectual side of the family, but like thinking I know it all. And that is at odds with the curiosity that I had so much as a little kid. And I continue to have, but it sometimes can get squished. And that curiosity that I don't necessarily know what's going to happen or what this means or that this is the end of the world. Or to your point, the person who commented a while back about relationships growing stale after a while. Curiosity is that you don't actually know who this person really is, and there's still a little bit of mystique there. There's still something you could learn, something you could try new that might reveal a new side or even encourage them to develop a new side to who they are, because we continue to grow and change and evolve, right? And so that curiosity, I think, is sort of paired with that willingness to accept and go through the moment. Like, what might be on the other side of this? What might this lead to? It goes a long way.
Yeah, exactly. And once you finally get to the area where you're comfortable within yourself, let yourself be a kid again sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
It's okay to let yourself laugh and, bust out a crayon, some crayons and a coloring book, ride a bike, fly a kite, do things that you used to enjoy. I mean, I've always told my clients, because they always say once you get sober, they don't know what to do with themselves because they were so fixated on the life of addiction. Everything was about addiction. So once they get sober, they're bored. They don't have any kind of hobbies or anything like that. Well, the same thing applies here. Once you face the trauma and you go through it and you reconnect with yourself, you have to find some hobbies that you enjoy, that you don't escape to, but you enjoy doing, because that's part of the fulfilling your love for yourself.
Absolutely. And it tends to be those more childlike things. They really do, I say childlike, but they really do. They're only maybe childlike in the sense that we tend to like block ourselves from them as adults,
Oh yeah.
So many of those things are more alive than what we tend to be. We tend so often to fall into routine, to pattern, which is great for certain levels of things. Like we need to have some level of security, but one of the paradigms I've always found interesting is like we cling to our ideas of life so heavily that we can create a life that's almost like death. Like we're so afraid of losing what we have that we become hardened and shut off. Whereas if we are willing to face the loss of those things, or say that these things can maybe fall away and it's not that important, paradoxically, we become more alive because we're more in the moment. We're more paying attention. I think that's really what kids embody. Is they're there. They're like fully present. They're like in it,
Right.
and that energy is just. I think. I mean, that's like the essence of what it means to be alive. I think in so many ways is to be able to, and saying be able to is hard because it's not really something you do so much as like the dropping away of the clinging to all this externalized, I have to be this way, and all the programming, all the conditioning. Without that, we run around like kids and play with dogs. But as adults, we think, I'm gonna get dirt on my pants, and somebody might see me rolling around with a dog, and like, what's the neighbor gonna think? It's like that literally doesn't matter, but you're losing your life in the meantime in this externalized thought thing. So it's I find it very fascinating. So thank you so much for having me on to
You're welcome. You're welcome. Hey, anytime you want to come back up, man, if you're in the area, and you're I'm having one of these types of streams or something, you want to hop on up, just come in the chat and let me know, man. Come on.
Absolutely.
You're welcome anytime.
I appreciate it.
You guys go and check out Andrew's page. We have pinned that in the chat. If one of the mods can pin that again before we shut her down. Andrew, thank you again. And
absolutely, I appreciate it.
I hope we have a good conversation again soon.
Yes, thanks for having me. Is there? I assume there will probably be like a video you put up of this on your channel after the fact.
Yeah,
Like a,
yes,
I
yeah.
will. I'll put a I'll put a little channel post or something. So if anybody who subscribes to me is curious, they'll come and
Okay.
and
Yeah, I
we'll,
do. I do most of my stuff that includes therapy, I guess, or life skills or anything. I do them on Sundays, and the
Mhm.
rest of the time I'm trying to raise, awareness on issues in our world that involve true crime and things that have been affected by true crime and on a deeper level. I just don't talk the whole time.
Yeah, yeah,
I
yeah.
try to incorporate examples. Well, you have a good night, Andrew.
Yeah,
Hit me
thanks
up
for having
sometime,
me,
man.
man. It's been
Hey,
great. Good to see
hit
you.
me up
Take
sometime.
care.
All right. Bye bye.
Bye bye.
All right. All right. All right. What do y'all think, guys? Did you get something out of this live? I hope you did because there was a lot discussed. Andrew was awesome to talk to. He was amazing to bounce ideas off of, and his intellect and his observations about life and the directions that it takes to get healthy again once you suffer a traumatic experience is remarkable. It's good to see people that are invested in their growth because I believe that we all should be invested in our growth whenever we feel like we're at a point of stagnation or we don't feel that we're where we need to be. It's always okay to start over. It's okay to keep going. It's okay to not blow up the whole thing that you built just in order to rebuild it again. It's you are worth fighting for every step of the way. Do it for you because the people that you love will be affected by your growth. You don't have to do it for them. You can do it for yourself and they will be affected by it. They will see the change in you. They will see and understand that there is purpose for them to start doing something different if they feel at any time that they're not progressing in their lives. So thank you so much, guys, for your chats, for your questions, for your humbleness and classiness in the chat. I don't have anything else to say. It was a good one. It was a good one. I enjoyed it immensely. Hopefully, we can have Andrew up here again. Um, you go check out his page, and you know, I'm sure he has some good videos that can help other people. Y'all have a good night. As I always say, Maestro, cue the music.